In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be comfortable. Good morning. When I was growing up, our next-door neighbor was an airline pilot. Back in the days when airline pilots were, not as common, at least not to me, I can remember him arriving home in his cool car with his cool pilot's uniform and, of course, those cool aviator sunglasses. He and his wife didn't have any children, which also was an oddity in the neighborhood, so they traveled a lot. And I would cut their grass and collect their mail while they were away. To compensate for my efforts, he took me out flying in this little two-seater plane. What I remember most vividly about that experience was sitting next to him in the cockpit. After taking off and flying around Lake Pontchartrain and buzzing a couple of fishing boats, he kind of casually looked over at me and said, "Why don't you take the controls?" This is not a safe idea. But the controls were right in front of me, basically a second mirror image of the steering wheel in front of him that he had been using. And so after a few basic instructions, he let go, and I did. I assumed the controls. Later, it was only later that I learned two important things. First, he never really fully let go. And second, those paired instruments that were guiding the plane, they're not called steering wheels. They're called yokes. Not like the yellow part of an egg, yummy as that may be, but these are yokes as in the words we hear from Jesus. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. The yokes in that plane and the yoke of Jesus are about journeying together, walking together, flying together, working together. Yokes are about solidarity, not subjugation. This is a very different type of yoke than the yoke that the early disciples wore. The Jewish people of first century Palestine were under the heel of their Roman overlords. A few of the religious elites had made their peace with the daily indignities, and they enjoyed a modicum of comfort and privilege within the Roman occupation. But the vast majority of the people lived subjugated lives. They were under the yoke of Rome. They toiled under the constant threat of the soldiers. They could not hope for justice. They could not escape the crushing demands of taxation. They weren't yoked with Rome. They were yoked by Rome for the benefit of the Roman Empire. That yoke was a soul-crushing and spirit-killing burden. So that's why Jesus introduces his invitation with those comforting words. Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. He understands the weight they're carrying, physically, spiritually, politically, financially. He also knows that the alternative yokes offered by other factions within that time period, either to collaborate, to withdraw, or to violently rebel, also were not suitable yokes. God's people are weary and they need rest. They need a different yoke and a much better partner. Sound familiar? So do we. Jesus knows the burdens we're carrying. He sees the weariness in our faces. He knows we need the help that comes from a different kind of yoke. So he offers an alternative way, the way of nonviolent, active resistance that is fueled by love and grounded in solidarity with God. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, he says, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Sounds like a very different kind of yoke. A yoke based on sharing rather than domination, gentleness rather than power, humility instead of arrogance. And when we accept this yoke, we choose, like we say, to walk in love as Christ loves us and gave himself for us. We receive the gift of God's offer of solidarity. We are yoked with Christ, not by Christ. That's why there's rest for our souls. We don't have to do this weary work alone, which is not at all how yokes work. You know, I had to read about this because, as you know, I know nothing at all about livestock and farming. But the yoke in farming is meant to harness 2 or 4 or more oxen. The yoke makes them a team. When Jesus says, my yoke is easy, he doesn't mean that it's not difficult. He means it's good and appropriate and suitable for the purpose intended. It's not contrary to our nature. Being yoked with God is how we were made to live, united and connected with the very ground of our being. Like a young ox that benefits from being paired up with a wise, seasoned, strong, and patient partner. Christ invites us to take up his yoke, to learn from his gentle and humble heart by walking side by side, step by step. But it's still walking, it's still labor. Let's be honest about that. It's difficult and countercultural work that we're doing, yoked with Jesus. And you know, I don't like it any more than you do. One of the first things I had to reveal to Shannon when we were meeting and getting to know one another was that, you know, I'm built for comfort, not for speed, right? There's a reason that I've lived in cities rather than on farms. Nevertheless, being yoked with Jesus means going where love leads and doing what love requires. Things, uncomfortable, hard things like welcoming, inviting, including, forgiving, sharing, learning, serving, trusting. But we're not carrying that weight alone. But we still have to do some of the lifting. And it's not always easy. Life, I don't have to tell you this. It's not always easy. Sally Muller, one of our own, Sally knows about both the promise of being yoked with Christ and the work that it requires. She and her husband, Jim, had to carry the burden of his leukemia diagnosis. And you can imagine the emotional burden of that. Being yoked with Jesus, you see, didn't allow them to avoid that reality or minimize or completely eliminate the pain of it. But they didn't walk it alone. Sally and Jim shouldered his illness with Jesus. How did they do that? Soon after the diagnosis, Karen Geary, the wife of Trinity's associate, Bruce Geary, sent them a prayer by St. Francis de Sales. Sally says, the prayer brought great consolation and faith that we were not alone in our journey. They she and Jim experienced Christ sharing their load, yoked with them, walking with them, and lightening the burden of their grief. They found rest for their souls. Sally went on praying that prayer even after Jim's death, designing and producing a cross-stitch of the prayer that now hangs in the foster room. A constant, ongoing, permanent reminder for us that we walk not alone, we walk sharing this life with Christ. I'm bringing all this up because it does, I think, give us bread for our journey. But also because Sally just wrote about it. So inside your bulletin insert, if you open it up, and I encourage you to do, I wonder if we could say that prayer together. Now, this is the cross stitch that Sally did. So you might have to kind of hold it close up or get out your reading glasses. But I'll lead you in case you're a little tentative. Together, do not look forward to what may happen tomorrow. The same everlasting Father who cares for you today will care for you tomorrow and every day. Either he will shield you from suffering, or he will give you unfailing strength to bear it. Be at peace then. Put aside all anxious thoughts and imaginations, and say continually, "The Lord is my shepherd, my strength and my shield. My heart has trusted in him, and I am helped. He is not only with me, but in me, and I in him." We are all wearied by the changes and chances of this world. Whether our yoke is keeping up with the Kardashians or keeping up with the relentless pace of change or just keeping up with our bills, we're all carrying heavy burdens. But we do not walk this way alone. So, I encourage you, take this prayer home with you. Otherwise, it's just going to get thrown away. So take it home with you. Pray it daily this week to help you remember that you are not only yoked to Jesus, you are yoked with Jesus. Take his yoke upon you and learn from him, for he is gentle and humble of heart, and he gives rest to our souls.